For 158 years, this company survived everything America could throw at it. It was born before the Civil War, and it outlived the Civil War. It survived the Great Depression, when banks failed by the thousands. It survived 2 world wars, the crash of the 1980s, and the collapse of a hedge fund that nearly took Wall Street down in 1998. It had lasted so long that it felt permanent, like a fixture of the city itself. And then, in a single weekend in September of 2008, it was gone. Not slowly, not over years, over about 72 hours, the largest bankruptcy in the history of the world. Here is the part that still haunts the people who were there. Lehman Brothers did not die because it was the weakest bank on the street. Others were just as sick. It died because, on that one weekend, it was the one bank that no one chose to save. 6 months earlier, the government had rescued a firm just like it. The day after Lehman fell, it rescued another. But when Lehman came to the table, the answer was no. This is the story of how a cotton trader from Alabama became a titan of Wall Street, and why, in the end, it was left to die. It did not begin on Wall Street. It began in a dusty shop in Montgomery, Alabama, in the year 1850. A young immigrant named Henry Lehman had arrived from Germany with almost nothing, and he opened a small general store selling dry goods to local farmers. His 2 brothers, Emmanuel and Mayer, followed him across the ocean, and the sign above the door became Lehman Brothers. In the cotton country of the American South, cash was scarce, but cotton was everywhere. So the brothers began accepting raw cotton as payment for their goods. Soon, they realized the cotton was worth more than the store. They were no longer shopkeepers. They were traders, standing between the farmers who grew the crop and the mills that spun it. It was a simple, powerful idea, and it would define the firm for the next century and a half. Do not make the thing, stand in the middle of the deal. As the business grew, the brothers moved north to New York, the center of American money. In 1870, they helped found the New York Cotton Exchange. From cotton, they moved into coffee, into railroads, into the raw industries that were building modern America. By the early 20th century, Lehman Brothers was no longer a commodities house. It was one of the great investment banks of New York, helping to finance the department stores, the airlines, and the corporations that would come to define the century. A family firm, cautious and proud, that had turned a pile of Alabama cotton into a seat at the very top of American finance. For generations, the family ran the firm. Robert Lehman, grandson of one of the founders, guided it through the Depression and the post-war boom. And when he died in 1969, the last of the founding blood left the building. What followed were decades of turbulence. The partners fought each other for control. In 1984, a weakened Lehman was swallowed whole by a giant, sold to Shearson and American Express for $360 million. For 10 years, the proud old name was just a division inside a credit card company. And then, in 1994, it was set free again, spun off as an independent, publicly traded company under the ticker LEH. The man who inherited this reborn firm was named Richard Fuld, though almost everyone called him Dick. Fuld had started at Lehman as a trader and never left. He was intense, brutal, and fiercely loyal, and behind his back, they called him the Gorilla for the way he could dominate a room without saying a word. Fuld had one obsession: to make Lehman a great firm again, feared and respected on Wall Street. And for a while, it looked like he had done it. Under Fuld, Lehman posted 14 straight years of profit. In 2007, it earned a record $4.2 billion. It became the 4th largest investment bank in America, behind only Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, and Merrill Lynch, with around 25,000 employees around the world. Fuld became the longest-serving chief executive on all of Wall Street, and he was certain of one thing above all others: his firm would never fail. To keep growing, Lehman needed a new engine, and in the early 2000s, it found one: the American home. Millions of families were buying houses, and every house needed a mortgage. Wall Street had learned to take those mortgages, thousands of them at a time, and bundle them into securities that could be sliced up and sold to investors around the world. It looked like magic. You could turn a street of ordinary houses into a machine that printed money. Lehman did not just want to trade these securities. It wanted to own the whole factory. In the year 2000, it bought a lender called BNC Mortgage. It owned another called Aurora. These were companies that specialized in loans to riskier borrowers, the kind of lending known as subprime. By 2006, Lehman's mortgage lenders were handing out close to $50 billion in loans every single month. It became the largest packager of mortgage-backed securities in the entire country. In 2007, it underwrote more of them than any other firm on earth. For years, this was the story of Lehman's genius. The stock climbed, the bonuses swelled. Fuld kept much of his own fortune in Lehman shares because he believed in the machine completely. But there was a quiet assumption buried inside all of it. The whole thing only worked as long as house prices kept going up. Nobody at the top of Lehman seemed willing to ask the obvious question: what happens when they stop? To understand what happened next, you have to understand one number. By 2008, Lehman Brothers controlled around $680 billion in assets. But it held only about $22.5 billion of its own money underneath all of it. Everything else was borrowed. That is a leverage ratio of roughly 30 to 1. Think about what that means. For every dollar the firm truly owned, it had bet 30 more with borrowed money. Its risky real estate holdings alone were 30 times larger than its entire cushion of capital. And here's the terrifying arithmetic of that position. If the value of those assets fell by just 3 to 5%, the firm's entire capital would be wiped out, not damaged, gone. Lehman had built a skyscraper of debt on a foundation the width of a sidewalk. In good times, leverage is a miracle. It multiplies every gain, and it made Lehman look brilliant and rich. But leverage has no conscience. It multiplies losses exactly as fast. The moment the ground shifted even slightly, 30 to 1 would stop being a source of profit and become a countdown. And Dick Fuld had one more belief that made it all more dangerous. He was convinced that if things ever got truly bad, the firm was too important to be allowed to die. Someone would step in. The government, a rival, anyone. Because they always had. That belief meant Lehman never seriously prepared for the alternative. Why plan for a death you are certain will never come? In 2007, house prices stopped going up. Then they began to fall, and the machine that had made Lehman rich went into reverse. All those mortgage securities, once treated as gold, started to rot as borrowers stopped paying. The assets on Lehman's books were suddenly worth far less than the firm claimed, and everyone on Wall Street knew it. In March of 2008, the first domino fell. A rival bank called Bear Stearns, sick with the same disease, ran out of cash in a matter of days. The government did not let it collapse. The Federal Reserve stepped in and lent $30 billion to help another bank, JP Morgan, buy Bear and keep it alive. To Wall Street and to Dick Fuld, the message seemed clear. When a big firm is in danger, the government rescues it. Lehman was bigger than Bear. Surely Lehman was safe. All through that summer, the pressure grew. Lehman's stock slid. Fuld searched desperately for a lifeline. He courted the Korea Development Bank, hoping for a rescue investment, but the talks fell apart in early September. Then, on the 7th of September, the government seized the two enormous mortgage companies, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. The safety net seemed to be everywhere, but it was quietly running out. By the 11th of September, JP Morgan, the bank that processed Lehman's trades, no longer trusted it and demanded billions in collateral. Lehman was running out of cash, out of friends, and out of time. The weekend that would decide everything had arrived. On Friday, the 12th of September, the most powerful men in American finance gathered in a fortress-like building in downtown Manhattan, the New York Federal Reserve. Treasury Secretary Hank Paulson, Fed Chairman Ben Bernanke, and the head of the New York Fed, Timothy Geithner, called the leaders of Wall Street into a room. The mission was simple and desperate. Find a way to save Lehman Brothers before the markets opened on Monday. There were only two real buyers left. One was Bank of America. But over that weekend, Bank of America walked away from Lehman and bought its rival, Merrill Lynch, instead. That left the British bank, Barclays. A deal was nearly done. Barclays would take the good pieces of Lehman and leave the toxic real estate behind, with the other Wall Street banks chipping in to cover the difference. And then it collapsed. The British regulator, the Financial Services Authority, refused to let Barclays rush the deal through without a vote of its own shareholders. There was no time for a vote. In an instant, the last buyer was gone. And this time, the government refused to fill the hole itself. No federal money, no guarantee. In the early hours of Monday, the 15th of September, 2008, Lehman Brothers filed for bankruptcy. 158 years ended in a single filing. That morning, the world watched a scene it would never forget. Stunned employees walking out of the glass tower on 7th Avenue, carrying their careers out the door in cardboard boxes. 25,000 people, a firm older than the light bulb, gone. And now comes the cruelest twist in the whole story. The very next day, the 16th of September, the government reached into its pocket again, this time for an insurance giant called AIG, which was drowning in the same crisis. It committed $85 billion to keep AIG alive, a rescue that would eventually swell toward $182 billion. Lehman had been allowed to die on Monday. AIG was saved on Tuesday. Step back and look at the whole sequence. In March, the government rescued Bear Stearns. In September, it seized Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. On the 16th, it saved AIG. And a few weeks later, Congress approved a rescue fund of $700 billion for the entire banking system. Almost everyone got a hand. Lehman got nothing. So why this one? The official answer was legal. The regulators said Lehman simply did not have enough solid collateral to justify a loan, that the Fed could not pour money into a hole in the firm's capital. But there was another answer, whispered and then shouted in the years that followed. After rescuing Bear Stearns, some in the government feared they had sent a dangerous message, that reckless banks would always be saved. They wanted to prove there was a limit. They wanted to make an example. And Lehman, arrogant and unloved on Wall Street, became the example. The line in the sand, the proof that the safety net had an edge. The example did not work the way they hoped. Letting Lehman fail did not calm the markets. It set them on fire, because Lehman was not an island. It owed money to nearly everyone, and it was woven into the financial system by tens of thousands of threads. When it vanished, panic spread at the speed of light. That same week, a giant money market fund broke down because it held Lehman debt that was now worthless, and ordinary savers began to fear that even their safest accounts might not be safe. Credit froze around the world. Banks stopped trusting one another. The crisis that Lehman's collapse unleashed would erase trillions of dollars of wealth and cost millions of people their jobs and their homes. And there is a bitter irony hidden inside it. Because Dick Fuld had been so certain the firm would be rescued, Lehman never prepared for its own funeral. It went down messily, destroying far more value than it needed to, precisely because its leaders could not imagine the word no. Out of the wreckage came a phrase that would define the next decade: too big to fail. The strange lesson of Lehman is that being too big to fail was never a promise. It was a gamble. Lehman bet its entire 158-year life on the assumption that someone would always catch it. For one weekend in September, no one did. And that is the difference between a firm that survives a crisis and a firm that becomes the crisis. Lehman Brothers began as three brothers weighing cotton in a small Alabama town, and it ended as a warning carried out in cardboard boxes onto a New York sidewalk. It had survived everything, but the one thing it never planned for: the moment the world decided it could live without it. If this story held your attention, take a second to subscribe, because this channel is a graveyard of empires that once believed they were permanent, and there are many more still to tell. And here is a question worth sitting with. Bear Stearns was saved. AIG was saved. Lehman was not. If you had been in that room on that weekend, holding the fate of 25,000 jobs and the entire global economy in your hands, would you have drawn the line at Lehman? Or would you have blinked? Tell me in the comments. I read them all.